Coming up on 5 Minute News. Senate Republicans block voting rights bill in key vote. International Criminal Court to probe atrocities in Venezuela. And planet Earth bounces back to 2019 carbon emission levels. It's Thursday, November 4. I'm Anthony Davis. Senate Republicans blocked the John Lewis Voting Rights Act from advancing on Wednesday when the Senate took a procedural vote on whether to open debate on the legislation. The final tally was 50-49, with GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voting with Democrats in favor. The John Lewis voting bill that the Senate considered is aimed at fighting voter suppression and restoring and updating key parts of the landmark Voting Rights Act, originally passed in 1965. The measure is named in honor of the civil rights icon and late Representative John Lewis of Georgia. At least 10 Republicans would have needed to join with all 50 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus for the legislation to advance. That was not expected to happen, as most Republicans have decried any Democratic attempts to enact new voting legislation, or indeed any legislation, in the current Congress as partisan and unnecessary. Democrats have been under intense pressure to pass voting legislation, as the party currently holds a majority in both chambers of Congress and the White House. But efforts by the party to do so have run into a wall of opposition in the Senate as a result of GOP resistance. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer thanked Murkowski after the vote on Wednesday, while criticizing the rest of the Senate Republican Conference for blocking the measure. Down to the last member, the rest of the Republican Conference has refused to engage, refused to debate, refused to acknowledge that our country faces a serious threat to democracy, Schumer said. Schumer went on to say that they will work to find an alternative path forward, even if it means going it alone to defend the most fundamental liberty we have as citizens. The International Criminal Court is opening a formal investigation into allegations of torture and extrajudicial killings committed by Venezuelan security forces under President Nicolas Maduro's rule, the first time a country in Latin America is facing scrutiny for possible crimes against humanity from the court. The opening of the probe was announced on Wednesday by ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan at the end of a 3-day trip to Caracas. Standing alongside Maduro, Khan said he was aware of the political fault lines and geopolitical divisions that exist in Venezuela, but he said his job was to uphold the principles of legality and the rule of law, not settle scores. While Khan didn't outline the scope of the ICC's investigation, it follows a lengthy preliminary probe started in February 2018, later backed by Canada and 5 Latin American governments opposed to Maduro, that focused on allegations of excessive force, arbitrary detention, and torture by security forces during a crackdown on anti-government protests in 2017. Human rights groups and the US-backed opposition immediately celebrated the decision. Since its creation 2 decades ago, the ICC has mostly focused on atrocities committed in Africa. The dramatic drop in carbon dioxide emissions from the pandemic lockdown has pretty much disappeared in a puff of coal-fired smoke, much of it from China, a new scientific study found. A group of scientists who track heat-trapping gases that cause climate change said the first 9 months of this year put emissions a tad under 2019 levels. They estimate that in 2021, the world would have spewed 36.4 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, compared to 36.7 billion metric tons 2 years ago. At the height of the pandemic last year, emissions were down to 34.8 billion metric tons, so this year's jump is 4.9%, according to updated calculations by Global Carbon Project. While most countries went back to pre-pandemic trends, China's pollution increase was mostly responsible for the worldwide figures bouncing back to 2019 levels, rather than dropping significantly below them, said study co-author Corinne Lequire, a climate scientist at the University of East Anglia in the United Kingdom. With 2020's dramatically clean air in cities from India to Italy, some people may have hoped the world was on the right track in reducing carbon pollution, but scientists said that wasn't the case. If the world is going to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times, it only has 11 years left at current emission levels before it is too late, the paper said. The world has warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius since the late 1800s. The figures are based on data from governments on power use, travel, industrial output, and other factors. Emissions this year averaged 115 metric tons of carbon dioxide going into the air every second. You can subscribe to 5 Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5 Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Subscribe, rate and review online at 5minute.news. 5 Minute News is an Evergreen podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.